Humans have divided themselves into multiple communities across the world. For example, whether this is nations, party affiliations, or our favorite music genre, we separate ourselves into different communities based on our ideas, what we feel, and what we think about the world around us. As Colin Powell, the former United States chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff mentions in a college books provided stimulus, teach the children the values that lend meaning to our lives and to the lives of our nation. But what gives an entire community, people who have never seen each other, common values? What makes us us? And why do we divide ourselves into these communities, and why are we so desperate to divide ourselves? My name is Joe Goyal, and this is Communities in Prehistoric Humans. My research question was, how important were communities and altruistic traits in prehistoric human survival? Altruistic traits are traits that allow us to feel empathy, to do good for others without regarding our own good. But when you think about it, evolutionary, these don't necessarily make sense, because evolutionary, we should need to pass down our genes. So how did these traits develop? As Samir Okasha from Stanford University adds, a group containing altruists, each ready to subordinate their own selfish interests for the greater good of the people, may well have a survival advantage over a group containing only selfish organisms. For example, if a certain group can only live up to a certain age, if they can all increase their survivability by being nice to each other, the entire group is more likely to advance, and thus their genes prefer these traits. According to Hamilton's rule, as long as our relatedness and our benefit to ourselves is greater than our cost, we will prefer these traits. Altruism without benefit. As Mark N. Wexler from Simon Fraser University mentions in the International Social Science Review, there appears to be a general human tendency to help others in distress, which has properties analogous to egoistic motivation, but plays outside of these motivations. In other words, even though we as humans develop these traits due to our own egoistic motivations, we express these traits outside of these motivations. We do these regardless of whether they'll help us or not, due to pure empathy because of our social awareness. According to Jean-Jacques Hublin from Proceedings of the National Academy of Science Journal, claims have been made that the level of altruism displayed by chimpanzees might actually be higher than what we thought. This shows that there can genuinely be a genetic factor in empathy and what we develop and what we consider empathy in humans. Survival through community. As James Charles from Deakin University puts it, perhaps our community strength, Aboriginal peoples, is a very powerful resistance and resilience. Australia, during the times when only Aboriginal people lived there, used to be an extremely harsh climate. And without technology, the only way for them to survive was through community, whether this is building houses together, fighting animals together, or even passing down flora, fauna knowledge through oral tales. So this shows that traditions and culture and communities allow people to actually survive in harsh conditions. As Lewis Bork from University of Oklahoma mentions, a primarily external orientation in social relationships seems to be necessary in most instances for regions to successfully persist in face of an environmental crisis. Communities and traditions and people passing down their knowledge is an important part in surviving in extremely harsh conditions. As Penny Speckins from the University of York suggests, archaeological evidence suggests that sustained care for those in need was part of daily life in humans even 1 million years ago. This suggests that although these empathy traits developed from pure genetics, we actually express these traits even though we might not have motivation or they might not benefit us. Whether this is taking care of the sick or sharing resources that we might not need. Because of our own social awareness, this has allowed us to develop these purely genetic traits into social traits. In fact, Maria Pereira from the Polytechnic University of Madrid states, populations self-organize in an indirect way such that people share resources that aren't necessary for them to survive. Religion. Humans have one more thing over other animals, which is our intelligence, but this comes at a cost, social self-awareness. We can't survive based off pure instincts. We need motivation and a reason to survive. This is where religion comes into play. For example, as Matt Rosano from Southern Louisiana University claims, supernaturalizing social life by including gods, spirits, and ever-vigilant and responsive social players forced our ancestors to be more cooperative, nicer to each other, and actually play well into communities. This forced us to take these genetic empathy traits and make them widespread in communities through religion and gods or spirits. Traditions. As Judith Binney mentions in Maori oral narratives of a college board provided stimulus, there is a diamond called the Maori in traditional Maori in New Zealand. This represents not only hidden knowledge but also the spirit of the Maori people themselves. These traditions come along and combine with religion and an overarching theme of community to give people a sense of purpose, to give people a reason to keep going or to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. This allows them to be more socially cooperative, work together, and form communities. In conclusion, small altruistic traits might have developed through genetics, but we display these traits through empathy, through social awareness, and through being able to make them as part of our social lives in communities, so our ability to extract these traits from their genetics. This allowed us to make these traits and display them outside of our own benefit, whether this is taking care of the sick or sharing resources. These then develop into religions, cultures, traditions to enforce these traits, and then these traits can finally become more bigger communities, from nations to music genre, our favorite music genres, to our favorite pop genres, to party affiliations in politics. Thank you.
All right, stay there. All right, 2 questions for you. First up, what evidence did you gather that you didn't use, and why did you choose not to use it?
Okay, so I gathered a lot of evidence which stated counterpoints as to how humans might have developed traits which are the opposite of these empathetic traits in order to actually circumvent and take advantage of others who do have these traits. For example, an example of this could be game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. But I decided not to use these examples, not because they didn't play well into my argument, but more so because these traits develop as a response to these empathetic traits, which in fact prove more my point. I just didn't feel like they necessarily were necessary to prove my point.
Okay, and what advice would you have for other people that choose this as a topic to research?
This topic is very complex, and I feel like the 2 main ways humans approach these topics is either archaeological evidence, but that's not very reliable since it's from millions of years ago, or simulations, but that also requires a lot of speculation. So both the methods we have to explore this topic are very speculative and very unreliable. So I would recommend to only focus on one of these methods and then also discuss and try to find solutions to its problems.